Sorry, my dog started barking, so let's try this again. I think we got through all of the 2000 election. Remember that Ralph Nader became a big deal because he was that third-party spoiler where his voters probably would have been attracted to Al Gore and voted for him had Ralph Nader not run. So this is how George Bush got above 270 because he won Florida, which you can see was 25 electoral points in this map, and as a result was president of the United States. And once he had a much easier time because incumbents are often reelected. So when people decide whether they are going to vote or not, it's important to understand the U.S. is very low. Why? Because we have election day probably on a Tuesday, and it's very crowded lines. You have to register well in advance in many states, so as a result, we have low voter turnout. Some would argue that it's not rational to vote, that 15 minutes or an hour that you spend waiting in line to vote, it's not a good use of time because your vote is not likely to decide the election. As a result, it's not rational for you to waste that amount of time. Political efficacy is the idea that your beliefs and your participation is really going to matter even if you don't decide the election. Your vote and your pressure can determine what politicians are going to do in the future. And some people believe it's their civic duty, that if we're going to have a democratic government, that the citizens should be informed and they should vote. Remember that you have to register to vote, and voter registration sometimes is difficult. Sometimes it's well in advance for you to be eligible to vote. Some states don't have any registration system. You just show up on election day, give your name, and boom, you're voting. North Dakota is that way, and I'm sure their voter turnout is much, much higher than many other states across the country. Then the federal government eventually passed the Motor Voter Act, which requires states to permit people to register to vote when they're getting their driver's license. So who votes? The more educated you are, the more likely you are to vote. The older you are, the more likely you are to go vote. The more Caucasian you are, the more likely you are to go vote. But other ethnicities are higher with comparable education. So the overwhelming determinant if you're going to vote is going to be education and then age. Females are more likely to vote. More married people and those who don't move around, who have a permanent residence, a home, are more likely to go vote. And then if you're a union member, your union is probably going to highly encourage you to vote, and you're more likely to vote. And all these things add up. So if you are several of these categories, you're very, very likely to vote. Do the people who turn out and are more likely to turn out, do they help Republicans or Democrats more? And increasing these categories of voters can make a difference. And then higher turnouts, is that going to help the party in power? If things are going well, that's probably true. If things are going really bad, we're probably going to have a really high turnout and a lot of turnover in government. People who are incumbents are going to get kicked out if things are unpopular. 2010 comes to mind when the Affordable Health Care Act was passed, and then Democrats were booted out of the House. Party identification, you're generally going to vote for the party that you agree with. Crazy idea. And this rise of the candidate-centered politics, remember that candidates are less reliant upon those political parties as they were 100, 150 years ago. And this has changed that view. So maybe people are not as affiliated with political parties as they are with candidates who they like. And many voters are individualistic, and are more independent or moderate in their ideology. How do Americans evaluate whether they like a candidate? Well, it's important to have good visual image, to have a great media team, to make sure your media events go well, and that you're presented with integrity and reliability and competence. But you also have to have a personality. George Bush was well liked, especially when he was campaigning, because he seemed like an average guy that you could have a beer with, that you could connect with. So this personality becomes important. It is going to be important that your candidates represent your views on policies, especially the more single issue you are. You're going to be voting based on that policy and that policy alone. So you must be informed about where the candidates stand on issues, and media doesn't do a very good job. So the more likely you are to vote on these issues, the more likely you are to belong to an interest group that's going to keep you informed on these. Candidates like to be a little bit mysterious. They don't like to necessarily give away any sort of divisive views that they have. So they're going to kind of hedge their language to seem like they're neutral or that they're in the middle or that both sides could agree with them. Remember that the Electoral College actually chooses the president. It's not the popular vote. It's the founders, the way they set up, the elite in the country. The states choose their electors, and in all states today, the state legislators have said however the popular vote goes in their state, that is who's going to be awarded the Electoral College delegates. So, for example, if Mitt Romney wins Texas, then the Republican Party gets to choose the 35 electors that is going to be sent to the Electoral College. And that happens in all 50 states. And the winner-take-all system that we have gives a bigger emphasis on more populated states. But remember, many of our big populated states like California and Texas and New York are already decided. And as a result, the swing states that are going to really have a big emphasis based on this winner-take-all system. So how does it work today? Each state has as many votes as it does representatives and senators, and no state has less than 3 because you have to have 2 senators and you have to have 1 representative per state. And the winner of the popular vote typically gets all the Electoral College votes. I think Nebraska and Maine splits up their Electoral College delegates based on the percentage of the vote that you get. But the other 40 states, it's winner take all. The electors are going to meet in December. Their votes are reported to the vice president in January, right before the next session of Congress starts. And if no candidate gets 270, a majority of those 538 votes, remember that the tiebreaker goes to the House of Representatives for voting for president. They vote as a block, as a state block, so there'll be 50 votes. And if they have a tie, they vote over again and over again like the election in 1800. The vice president is going to be chosen by the Senate. So voters can steer government only when there are noticeable policy difference between the candidates. Typically there's not. They try to fight for the middle ground, especially during a general election. Candidates vow to continue popular policies, and as a result, Republicans, maybe who were against Social Security 70, 80 years ago, now act like they are the protectors of Social Security. Why? Because those policies are really popular. And the thing that can bring down politicians the biggest is bad economies, high unemployment. You saw how President Obama battled with that during his first term. Elections are generally supportive of governmental policies and power. Voters feel that they're sending a message. It's that Lincoln's institution. Elections are a linkage institution, and you're sending a message to government that you like what one party is doing or that you want to get rid of one party. So thanks for listening, and good luck studying.